All right, welcome back to our last meeting. So I'm actually happy for the turnout, even though it's sort of, not in the masses here, but we've sort of slowly dwindled to a core of our dedicated followers, I think, especially it being Halloween. So it being Halloween, in fact, this and our last meeting as well, this may run a little bit shorter. So this is more thinking about how to bring things together, put it on the web, speaking a little bit more abstractly in this case, because some of this is stuff you probably need to consult with others if you want to do something really detailed. But then, for those of you, especially who have kids, I figure people probably don't mind getting out early on Halloween, so no one's in costume, unfortunately. Well, I was telling my wife that for Halloween, I'm masquerading as an actual academic. Okay. So once again, this is our last meeting. I think everyone in here is aware of that, but then the one for next week has been canceled. But if there's interest, I might put out an announcement on our Canvas page and see if we can have another meeting. Again, I just reiterate, if you ever want, email me, and I'm more than happy to sit down. I've been fascinated by all the projects I've learned about here at USF. So blows my mind, these sort of applications already underway. So the theme for today is web publishing. And so the majority of, I think, our discussion will discuss sort of the technical aspects, just to let you even know what sorts of languages are involved, what sort of scale of projects are possible, and then also just to think about some of the issues involved with web publishing generally, copyright issues, difficulties that one has, especially linking data. And then finally, to just wrap up this whole workshop by thinking about the larger issues involved with digital humanities, but also, again, the possibilities. So, most of you are probably aware of HTML, even if you don't know what it is. You've probably heard HTML, if for no other reason than the end of every web page ends with like .htm or HTML. So HTML simply stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And it's a little bit different than a standard computer programming language. HTML is not really a full programming language in the sense of something like C or C++. HTML instead is a sort of way of contextualizing text and adding other elements in a way that comes out much more like a series of commands for presentation. So HTML does not, for example, run calculations. HTML does not interact with a database directly. HTML in many ways is a very static kind of language. With HTML, you say, here's the layout that I want. Here are the various design features, fonts I want you to use. And if you're working entirely within HTML, that's also where you put your content. So to give you one very simple example, in case you've never seen HTML, there we go. Okay. So let's see. Is that looking there straight? So here you can see this is, what you have here is the most bare bones thing that you need for an HTML document. So in every HTML document, you have certain tags, which you can see here. This is HTML, and then there's another one down here that says /HTML. Those tags just encapsulate and encode the various data that follows in between them. So the HTML tag runs from here till here. So everything inside of that is a part of this HTML tag. The head tag runs from here to here, and everything inside of that is a part of the header, which I'll get to in a minute. And then you have the title tags. And were there anything in between there, it would be within the title. And same thing with the body. So if you want to develop a web page in HTML, this is bare minimum. I mean, this is what you need to have to start putting any amount of text in. And the reason why is that all HTML documents begin and end with the HTML tag, so that just says when a web page reads it in, the web page starts here, the web page ends here. So anything in there is something to do with the web page. Within the heading tag, right, you have especially data about that web page gets put there. So we have here our title, but a lot of other sort of tags can get thrown in that heading tag. You can put metadata there. You can put keywords for search engines in your heading. You can also add, what I'll talk about later, JavaScript, which is a way to add true programming within your web page. In your body, here to here, is where the actual stuff that gets presented on your web page goes. So any text that you want them to read, that's where it goes. I mean, you have some text in the sense of the title, but that's just the title that appears like, as the label on the window you're on. But all your content is going to go here within the body. So just to give you some sort of basic example, we have here, hey, I'll put title, I'll put test page, and since every programming example ever uses the hello world example, I will then simply save this, and all I need, this is simply a plain text document, right? All HTML files ultimately are simply plain text. I'll just save this onto my desktop. Let's call it test.html. If I now open this up, let's see, resolution on this. You can see right there it is, hello world, right? And so I can put in anything I want there. You can then modify that text with all sorts of other commands. So a very simple one is, I'll tell it this is a headline, and it's already going to know a little bit about what to do with that. We could further define it, but if I put H1 tags around it, you can see it's now big, right? So the simple idea is those tags control all sorts of things. They can be the color of the text, they can be a tag that drops an image in, it can be a tag that modifies paragraph layouts, right? So the simple thing of, just as like when you're in Microsoft Word and you want to control the indent or the line spacing, anything like that is within HTML. So I have on the PowerPoint, I don't want to go back to it right now, I have a list of various pieces of software you can use for HTML design if you're interested. In terms of getting at raw HTML like this, you're going to want a good plain text editor. So I have one listed both for OS X and one for Windows on there. I know I've mentioned these I think before, but for OS X, Text Wrangler is fantastic, and Sublime Text for Windows works really well. And for both of these, they work well to debug HTML because once this starts getting complicated, it gets really easy to mess things up. When I was an undergraduate and making my way through and almost going into computer science, there was a period where my friends and I we developed a 3D pawn game. Like, you put on 3D glasses and you actually see the ball go back and forth. And we had an error that took us over a month to solve. And we finally realized we just had a missing semicolon. And, which normally would kind of jump out in a debugger, but the way the code was written, it didn't flag it right there. It kind of thought it was coming from somewhere else. And with this, I can't tell you the amount of times I've sat there and struggled for an hour or two. And it's as simple as, amidst everything, I have a missing end tag, like that one right there, you see. When I actually did the H1 tag here, I actually did not need to do this. I was not trying to demonstrate this for you, but I did anyway, I guess. That I forgot to put the slash, which says end that tag. So now if I was about to go on and have text elsewhere, I would be wondering why that's also screaming at me in bold font. The nice thing about these text editors, both Text Wrangler and Sublime, is that when you end an end text tag like that, it makes the tag that it's ending flash. And so you might start to notice that if I put an end H1 here, and this doesn't flash, but a theoretical H1 tag way above it flash, I realize, whoops, I made a mistake a long time ago. And so it can help me kind of go in on that. So you can use Notepad, but these programs are a lot nicer. And again, they say plain text, so you don't see any font changes in this document. You sort of code those in. Now, ultimately, HTML has a lot of power in terms of controlling your content. There are all sorts of questions that come up with web design that really are beyond the scope of this kind of workshop. You know, when you're putting together a website, you are not only dealing with the sort of data that you have as scholars, but you're also dealing with choices like colors, right? Something that does not exactly feel like anything your academic training may have prepared you for, but you know, designing color choices can be crucial. As somebody who remembers all too well the flurry of web pages in the mid to late 90s that were nothing but like fluorescent yellow text on black background, and yellow and red text, just so you know, is among the most aggravating for the eye. So avoid that generally. Oh, you know, I realized I forgot. I didn't think to put this on there because it's a tutorial that I found originally for 3D design. But there's an excellent tutorial actually on understanding color choices that I can put up on a resources page that basically gives you a number of schema to choose from, where it basically gives you a color wheel, and you can decide, you know, do you want monochrome, bichrome, tri, and when you do that, there are sort of mathematically the most pleasing alternate colors to go with once you start with one color. So if you start with red, you either want one other main color on the opposite side of the spectrum, or two other main colors split, you know, almost like a peace sign. So there's a kind of way you can think about it and narrow down on colors, which is also just great for like anything. You know, I mean, you got to paint your house. It's remarkably useful. As somebody who, I had no sort of natural intuition with colors, I actually found it really great to kind of be able to break it down into a process and make it much more accessible. Yeah.
How do you get from this HTML that you put together, this little bit, how do you get that up onto the web and sit it on your desktop?
That's a great thing. That's something I forgot to add. So I will also add that to resources. So yes, you have this on your desktop, right? But I'm guessing you don't want people to be sitting there coming over to your house to check out your database. So usually what you use is an FTP program. And so I have one here with the great and hilarious icon of CyberDuck, which is a free one. I think, yes, it's both for PC and OS X. There are others like FileZilla. Let's see here. I had some issues yesterday, and I think what may be happening is, I think there's something about the USF network that prevents me from logging in, because I have my own private server that I sort of bought on my own resources, and for some reason I don't seem to be able to log into it when I'm on campus. So I'm thinking that it just, let's see if we can try it here. I think it just blocks the outgoing connection. Yeah, it's not going anywhere. So you start one of these FTP programs, and if I were doing this for the first time, I would choose Open Connection, and you will get information about what to fill in here from any web service you have. So if you're hosting it on USF, I'm sure that they have information to tell you what web server address to put in. You know, any service that you buy from will give you some sort of login information. But you usually type in your server, so since my web space is iobin.com, in this case it's ftp.iobin.com, it usually has a default port, which in my case is the one that it's on. I type in my login, don't look, no. I just type in that information like that, and in this case I know that my server is set to SSL, and so I then hit connect. And what I see then is a sort of display that shows all the files on the servers, and I can navigate that very similar to the way you would navigate in Windows or OS X. You know, you double click to go into a folder and see its contents. And So there I can go within any folder and then say upload and choose files, and it will just put it on the server. So in the case of, say, a home page, usually the home page is either titled index.html or just index.html. So if you, within any folder, have a index.html, if somebody then goes to the website or goes to the folder without actually typing in a specific web page, it will go to the index page. And so I can simply take that document that we just made there, that whole hello world, and if I say that as index.html, right at the root level of iobin.com, if you went to my whole website would be gone, and what you would see is hello world. And so that's how you get that information up on the web. I don't know, sometimes universities have special software because they don't want people FTPing in directly, so I don't know about USF specifically yet. But it's usually in that case, it's usually some software that you use that does the FTPing for you. It just allows them to control what you can do, so you don't go into their servers and mess everything up in that way. Yeah?
When you buy a domain name, or if you already own one, then how do you link that domain name to the page you're hosting?
To the page hosting? You can, there are different ways of doing this. For most people, I think very commonly web services now offer the domain names and web hosting together. So if you purchase through a service, you simply, it'll be like $6.99 a month, $9.99 a month to host the web page, and then it's usually like $10 a year to pull a domain name. And because you're sort of going through the same company, it's all part of the same process. And so they just automatically create the web page and automatically, get your domain name and link it to it. Because this is the confusing thing, is every website, technically, when you type in a domain name, technically that's just a shortcut to a much longer address you're never seeing, an IP address. And so basically what you do is you buy web space, and then you buy the domain name, and so anybody who goes to that domain name gets forwarded on to your sort of actual location. So a lot of that's combined. Where it's not, you would have your IP, and then there are other services to register domain names, and you basically give it your IP address, and it then sends it on in the future, yeah. But I think a lot of the commercial ones now have them combined. But there are reasons why you might not want to, you might like the web hosting services offered by one company, but it's not a great deal for domain, and so you choose to go through somebody else, and that's fine. So yeah, this is basically how you put your data up there. And this works for HTML files, it works for everything. FTP just allows you to put files up onto a server. So you put a web page, but that's also how you put all the pictures that appear on your web page, all the movies. It's how you can throw all sorts of data up on there, any sort of file. So yeah.
So HTML is basically a way to create the content. FTP is basically a way to link it to the web, and then whatever domain provider you're using is the one that's actually going to publish it. Is that sort of the sequence?
Sort of. It's in HTML. Yes, you can use it to design content. Although, as we'll talk about, for really large stuff, you sort of don't use it so much to design the base level content. You might use a database for that. But you use it to structure the content,
right,
to get it in, to get it in the presentation form. You use FTP to move that from your computer to a place where it can be accessed online. And then, yeah, the domain name brings other people to the domain name itself is nothing more than a link to your server.
Right, okay.
So it's all published on your server technically. But the domain name is sort of this weird, it's a middleman people use to get to you, basically.
Right.
Let's see. Which is, I should mention, something that gets weirdly political at times, the domain names. Not only are, of course, companies have this sort of issue, but the problem is we increasingly run out of domain names, especially popular ones, and now there's especially the fight over suffixes, and so certain countries complain that they've been cut out of getting a fair number of various dot whatever endings. Great. So in addition to this simple plain text kind of thing, where HTML starts to get much more powerful in terms of display are when you use things like tables and frames. And unfortunately, I did not think that I have Dreamweaver installed on a portable hard drive, which I did not bring with me today, naturally. So I would have loved to have shown you Dreamweaver as a design suite. But tables essentially work conceptually like a spreadsheet, right? If you think of a table with rows and columns, and you can, in HTML, control the size of those rows and columns and also their properties in very complex ways to achieve aesthetically pleasing website design. You know, what you don't want is a page that looks like a bunch of text in a row with some images just thrown in the middle. So, you know, if you look at any site, you can usually find a variety of tables or other choices. So, for example, on the website of this dashing individual, there are in fact a number of tables running throughout this website. Some far less visible, and you might not even know that they're there. So there is already a table that is one row by one cell that takes up the entire web screen. And so it just says, you know, make the height of this table 100% of the size of the window and 100% of the width. And then I tell that cell, align vertically and horizontally. So what happens if somebody has a gigantic monitor is I can make sure that my whole web space, rather than spreading across the whole thing, will still only be 800 pixels wide, but the whole thing will sit in the middle of their display rather than being on the top left or top right or something like that. So I can control that placement. There's then another table which runs this whole length here. There's then another table inside of the header here controlling that layout, and then a table inside of the body for each of the paragraphs. And so that allows me to control the placement of everything much more finely. You can maybe see a much more obvious table here on my links page, where you can sort of actually see the fact that I have the rows color-coded in that way. It's very useful for things like this. I have my CV and digital skill set online, and this is all a table. And that's why it's formatted so nicely. That's why it looks like it's Microsoft Word. I simply have a little header here, and then you can break the rules of a sort of standard spreadsheet and merge cells. So I have one cell that spans across both of these columns for headers of different sections. And so that makes that a lot easier, again, to just format aesthetically pleasing things. You might find that the learning curve with tables, it's a little frustrating at first sometimes. They do weird things. If you don't know how to control things like the borders, sometimes they'll by default have borders pop up, but often when you're using it to control content, you don't want that. You want it to be kind of hidden. They also automatically do things like cell padding. You notice this text here doesn't run directly at the top. There's a little bit of a margin there, and so you can control things like that very well through tables. And so, you know, in so many ways, HTML allows you to sort of pretty aesthetics of things. But again, it's not the sort of thing that within HTML, what I could not do is take input from a user and then generate some sort of response on the basis of that. So I couldn't have a user, I couldn't have a user enter some information about them and then your web page reacts and displays new data in response. HTML can actually ask the question. HTML has tags to do forms. So like you go to some survey page and you can have users click option boxes or check boxes and do all that. But HTML can't really do much with that data. The purpose of that is that you can then, as I'll mention in a little bit, use other programs that take the requests that you put in on an HTML page, then work with that, often with the database, and then give you your results. So HTML is the presentation side. right? It's the front end, it's the pretty picture, but it's not the power database. So I included in the PowerPoint list of some of the more popular web design programs. So there's Adobe Dreamweaver sort of remains, I think, probably the most popular commercial web design. It's the one that I use. It's very nice because in Dreamweaver you can graphically edit your web page, which is what a lot of the options do now. So you can do things like you create a new table, and rather than having to see it all in text where you say table width equals 800 pixels, and you're not seeing it, and then you then have to go to another program and load it to test and see. You can simply say insert new table and drag it to the width you want, or open up within the user interface a properties table below and just type in width 800, and so it makes a lot of those things easier. You don't have to know, you wouldn't have to know off the top of your head that the table uses the width syntax and all of that syntax. It just pops up like a little database and says, what's the width? And you can say 800 pixels or whatever it is that you want. The other advantage of something like Dreamweaver is you can then usually see even split screen the actual code and the visual side all at once. Because I know that for myself, often the way that Dreamweaver and any other design suite works, they often use inefficient code. And so it's something that I like the graphic design to tweak with things, but I often find that the way, if I just sort of use their default tools and throw it in, it's not the best. And so it's great both for, you're doing your brand new first web page, it's a lot less scary, but it's also nice that it gives you full control over the HTML code should you get to that level and want to do that. You can, certainly for certain servers, also set up your FTP program to work within Dreamweaver, so that you're designing your website within Dreamweaver and it already knows all that login information for your server. And as I make a change, I simply tell it, upload this file to the server. You can also synchronize it with your website so that it will automatically read through a folder locally on your hard drive, which is your local copy. And when it detects any changes, we'll upload the pages that have been changed onto the web server, or vice versa, depending on how you want it. So that you basically can do edits purely on your computer, but it will take care of remembering all the files you need to upload. And trust me, that's useful. These sorts of, any web page might have dozens or more files going into it. And it is ridiculously easy when especially when you're editing a lot, to do something stupid like I have done dozens of times and, forget that it was my computer that had the newer version of something, and then so I accidentally re-downloaded it from the server and I just destroyed my local copy that I've been working on for the last 12 hours with a copy from yesterday. If you set this thing to synchronize, it doesn't happen, right? It takes care of it automatically. So that way you're sort of sure to not screw that up horribly, which, as empty-headed as I am, that's a lifesaver.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you're doing something like designing a personal website, what would be the advantage of using Dreamweaver over using something like WordPress that's really user-friendly, but still is customizable?
WordPress, it depends, I guess, on sort of what your goals are. In many ways, WordPress has become fantastic for sort of personal websites where you don't want to do something crazy. You want to put up some information about yourself, some pictures, you want to put up your resume, something like that. WordPress is very accessible. So I have a little bit on WordPress we're going to talk about later, because it's also great for blogging and things like that. You have more control when you're sort of doing the HTML. WordPress is not going to be able to do as much with larger projects. So I would say for maybe your sort of average personal web page, WordPress is a pretty good option. It's gotten a lot better too since it first launched. I haven't really used it, so I'm not an expert in it. I mean, I'm aware of it. I sort of know its tools. But if you sort of want to do anything kind of more advanced HTML, I sort of guess I'm repeating myself at this point. I think one big thing that might be an issue for some is for WordPress, you don't necessarily have as easy access to your content at all times, especially when you're dealing with any other applications that are also using your web data. Let's see. In addition to Dreamweaver, there's also, I've not really used this all that much, but Google Web Designer. Google Web Designer was created actually to make HTML ads that were very interactive. So this sort of thing started back in the day with Flash. If you've probably seen some of those stupid ads that they had a long time ago that, like, punch the monkey, and there's like some stupid, it's just trying to get you to click on a thing to go to some, rip-off website. But it does not have to be limited to just ads. It can be used for fully interactable HTML websites. And so you can just sort of see it's a neat little graphic GUI, and it allows you to break out of, to some extent, the tables issue with HTML. That you now are not sort of stuck, is you can have elements laying over other elements very easily. You can have stuff slide and flow through what would otherwise be a table. You can't actually do all that within HTML itself. This just makes it easier. There is a tag. Really don't worry about this one, but if you yourself want to break away from the kind of table-oriented approach, div tags are increasingly very powerful, and they work for all sorts of things, but you basically create a space. I don't know really how to define it. It's a weird concept, but you sort of define a layer almost, and then you can move that layer independently of the rest of the page. So for example, again, just to pick up my own website here, if you go to my main website, I've got all this text. This is all within a table, and within the table, you can see there's a thumbnail. But if I pop over the thumbnail, this all pops up. That's a div tag. And I basically say there's a layer, it's there the whole time, but it's hidden, and you can't see it. Except when you roll over this, I want you to pop that div tag up with this data. There are easier ways to do a simple kind of pop-up, but this sort of thing allows me to essentially create anything I want within this layer, so it doesn't have to just be a picture. I could have captions, I could have anything else that I wanted. I could have an entire web page hidden inside of that. So you could do all sorts of neat stuff. That's great a lot if you're wanting to design stuff where you want to have a pop-up with like metadata about objects, div tags. So Web Designer is another software to use for that. When it comes to graphic design, that again is sort of beyond the scope of this course. The Adobe suite still remains, I think, far and away the most popular commercial piece of software. It's what I use. I was lucky enough to have a father who was a computer teacher, so at a young age I had access to a licensed copy of Adobe Photoshop. It's understandably a little bit more difficult for many other individuals. It's not cheap. I can't remember, but I think it's currently the license for Adobe Creative Cloud is probably running over $1,000. So it's not cheap, but I think we have access to a license here through USF. So yeah, we do that. Yeah.
So you can buy the software outright from Adobe, or you can get a month-to-month subscription. USF students, I think, you get 12 months for $60, and it's a subscription to the software. If you just go as a student or a teacher and use your email address as proof that you're a student, I think it's $20 a month. Or if you just get Photoshop and Illustrator and that stuff, it's like $10 a month.
Nice. Sweet. That is far more doable, I think, than the sticker shock of $1,000 or so. I'll say this for Adobe, in addition to the actual software being powerful, because it's been so popular, there are so many resources online that you just type Adobe Illustrator, and if you just type tutorial, you almost get too much. You sort of need to, first steps tutorial just to learn anything, but as you get in there, Photoshop can do insane kind of stuff. So for example, When I was taking pictures at the Athenian Agora this summer, I had the problem that I wanted to get a picture of the sacred way with no tourists in it. So I could use it to sort of for a presentation. You can imagine, what it would have been like, but there's never not tourists there. With Photoshop, you can take a series of pictures, all from the same location, and then it will run them in comparison to one another, and basically only make a composite of what is common between all those pictures. So because the tourists are different in every picture, it knows those are the differences and ignores them. And where there was a tourist, it will look to fill that space with the information from a different picture where instead I could see the dirt. And so from that, I have an image of a completely empty agora that never existed. So it is super neat. It also, obviously I think you may be aware that Photoshop itself now has become a verb. You talk about, I want to Photoshop this. Whether or not you're even using the Adobe suite for this, people just sort of say, I'm going to Photoshop it. Something that has caused the Adobe Corporation a little bit of legal angst. Again, one of the things like Kleenex and Xerox, the way that they sort of fought these legal battles. So it's incredibly powerful. It is very useful for putting content up for the web. It allows you to make graphic design choices, affect your photographs, but it also then allows you easy ways to format it for the web. You can easily set your JPEG compression size, and it will tell you the actual size of the file. So this is why I was always trying to get my mom to even use Photoshop on the most basic level, so she will stop sending me scans of myself in kindergarten that are like 10 megabytes. So if you're putting data on the web, it's important that you do not use overly large file sizes when possible. I know when I was an undergrad, at this point, it would have been, 12 years ago, 13 years ago. At that point, the standard was your website should load within 8 seconds, which, given the general capabilities at that time, meant that you could have only a tiny sort of website, in terms of the graphics, if you don't want to go crazy. Now, thank goodness, broadband is everywhere, so you can go much more robust, but you still should be thinking about this, right? Even if you're going to go with an incredibly large image, don't use maximum compression unless you absolutely need to. Let's see. It also allows you to do things like save for the web. It actually has an option called Save for the Web, which then gives you a special Save As pop-up display, which is fine-tuned to help you sort of choose different things for the web. So that way, if you were going to save it as, and I know some people say GIF file, I've actually heard that is the correct way, but dang it, I was raised in GIF, so I'm just going to keep saying GIF, even if it's wrong. GIF files, you can sort of set what you want your color palette to be or how intense. It's all sort of automated through that, which used to be a lot more complex. I'll just say that the Adobe suite in general is awesome. You can do more than you've ever imagined through that. You can edit and composite movies together, edit sound. So if you're going to do a Digital Humanities project involving any sort of music or speeches, the way that you can really find, edit, and even analyze sound through the Adobe suite is something like I've never really seen elsewhere. The tools that it has for both sound and movies are among the most used in the industry. So it means that you have the capability, when you have this on your program, in theory, to do everything that movie producers themselves have access to. Again, in theory, some of them have extensions and plugins that you don't have, and they have a certain technical base because they have a lot of people that are trained in it. But it's no longer the case, right, where you're sitting there with your home camcorder trying to edit things out on a VHS tape, right? You have every capability that the industry has. There is now, for Photoshop, there is a free alternative, and it is, perhaps somewhat politically incorrectly, titled GIMP. So it's the GNU Image Manipulation Program. That's why it's called GIMP. This is a free alternative to Photoshop. It's open source, so that's all an advantage. Not just that it's free, but that you can write your own plugins for it if you see your own need that way. And it doesn't do everything Photoshop does, but it's amazing what it does do for free. I'm astounded. Again, the entire open source movement has blown me away. The stuff that is now completely free is stuff that even 5-10 years ago would have cost thousands of dollars. So it's just weird being in the future that there's that much. Maybe I sound bold with my concept. I keep saying being the future, but I just maybe I finally hit that age where I'm just like I can't believe how much stuff has changed. Finally. So there's this piece of software. I also like to highlight, this isn't so much directly for HTML, but for anything. There's a neat piece of software that I was clued into called OmniGraffle, which is, I think, just for the OS X, unfortunately. But OmniGraffle is fantastic for web design graphics, but also any kind of graphics. As in, you're giving a presentation and you're doing nothing more than a PowerPoint and you want some neat diagrams, right? You don't want to do any database display, you just want to make a diagram. OmniGraffle simplifies this. If you just want to make a poster, OmniGraffle is incredibly powerful. So rather than having to go into Photoshop or Illustrator and manually make all the ovals and whatever, you just go in here and new, and you choose whatever palette you want. So in this case, I'll just go with. You can even set automatic layouts to different kinds of displays. So there's a circle chart, and I have that to start with, right? And I just go in here and I edit, and here it brings up all the data about it, so I can change all the fonts, all the whatever, and it's all within one spot. And again, it's really nice because all the stuff is tied. So when I move this, the line attaching it also moves. So if I was in something like Photoshop, I would have to move the circle, then move to the layer where the line is and grab that. And so, when you need to put something together in a hurry, this is immensely useful, just for sort of streamlining things.
Microsoft Visio would be the equivalent to this on the Windows platform.
Oh, I'm sorry, what is it again?
Visio.
Visio. Visio or Visio?
Visio.
Visio, okay, great. That's actually, didn't know the Windows equivalent, so thanks.
OmniGraffle will read a Visio file, but not vice versa.
Okay, yeah. That is so, still annoying sometimes the problem, being on the Mac side of things. Yeah, so, and obviously you can see you can export in a lot of things. So you can actually export this as an HTML image map. So image maps, HTML image maps are basically where you project an image and then you define various areas in the image that become clickable. So if you imagine a map, right, where you see the whole Earth on it, but you can make it so you click the US and it goes to a page about the US, something like that. So you could export this, you could actually put this so it appears on an HTML page, and then they could click those various options and it will go to the page set for that. So again, a sort of powerful tool. Let's see. Not sure why I'm not getting. Oh, there we go. I have such an issue with trying to move the mouse on it. For some reason, I look that way, and my right brain crosses with my left brain, and they just don't know what the other is doing. It's not going off the right side of that screen. Normally, I move it off the right. I'm kerfuffled. I don't know. I mean, you can obviously see there's my Mac mouse, but I'm trying to go back to the PC.
Alt-Tab?
No, that's not work because the PC is just not. The problem is I've got. Let's see. Close it this way. That might help. Well, I never thought the thing that would lay me low is I can't get my mouse on the monitor. I feel foolish. I don't know, I've gone stupid. There's, did you break it? I don't think so. I think I'm just probably missing something obvious. I've just taken the mouse off the right side of the screen here to try to bring it back here, and it's just, no. It was already there.
It was right here. It probably was just hovering this black spot right here.
Yeah.
Not quite between screens.
That's just weird because I kept it. I don't know. Oh well, I'm not gonna. Thanks. Sorry for unnecessarily.
All right, I have a degree in doing this.
I feel it just so feels like, you know, when you try to like take the lid off of a jar or something and you hand it to somebody else and it just pops off and you feel like an idiot. Okay. I also have on here a list of HTML resources. HTML Goodies is a great website to find all sorts of tutorials. So not just in terms of sort of starting HTML, but even things like you want to start using tables. It will give you good explanations as to what tables are and how to use them, but then also specifically driven tutorials so you can sort of follow through and use it yourself. Easy HTML Code is also a great introduction. It has some tutorials. It's not comprehensive, but it's a great place to start, especially if you just sort of don't even know what is what with HTML. And then finally, I have the W3 Schools, which is a website that has the sort of full standards data about HTML tags online. So it's not a place that, I think they do have some tutorials on there, but the main focus of that website is I want to know every possible thing I could do with a particular tag. And it will tell you, so the link tag, and here's the syntax of the link tag, here's all the properties you could in theory add, and so it lets you sort of know, it's a reference website when you're dealing with something like that, and you can just sort of go there to look at individual tags. And then finally, I have a link down on the bottom, in case any of you want to have your own server space. There are a lot of advantages, even if you sort of envision your project ending up on a USF server space. There's a lot of advantages to having your own. Among other things, you know, should the university tomorrow decide to completely change its server architecture, you're not in trouble. You have control over that space. You can, I suspect, do a lot of things that would be more difficult were you going through a university access to a web server. When you own it yourself, you can do a lot more. The problem is, getting a web server, there's a lot to look for. You both need performance, right? You don't want a slow website, but you also want control, especially if you're doing a digital humanities project. If you're doing something much more than HTML. The problem is, if you want to run a MySQL database, and you want to run PHP scripts on there to generate web, you know, in response live, you want to run visualizations, you want the whole shebang, there are a lot of web servers out there that simply don't allow you to do that for security reasons. They don't want, you know, Yahoo Web Hosting does not want your average person to be able to go in and rewrite the security permissions on all these files, you know, maybe for understandable reasons. So I actually asked a friend of mine who works as an IT in the commercial industry in Rhode Island, and I asked him what would be a good service, and could he check around and ask for what would be a good service for scholars who want to put stuff up on the web and at least in theory be able to put up MySQL or any other database server that they want, run PHP or any other kind of major programming that they want on that, and get a decent price and a decent speed. And that's the site that he recommended. So they have packages as low as $6.99 a month to $9.99 a month. It's $10 for a domain name service, which is, again, it's all within the website. So if you're sort of looking to get your own website and on the cheap, it's a good site, and you could, in theory, then do everything on that you wanted to. Oh yeah.
IT also has given you web space.
They have, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
If you're a student, if you go on the IT's website and search for personal web space or whatever, you have, I think, 5 gigabytes of data on your student drive, and the web server is inside that folder.
Awesome. But not for faculty. Is that the case then?
I don't know.
Probably do, yeah. Do you know, can it do things like run PHP scripts, or can you put like MySQL databases, or is that?
I don't know. I have my own website. I just know that they also
They also
give you
do
web
that.
space.
So that might be something to check into. I would not be surprised if they didn't let you do the crazy kind of stuff. At least maybe not without some sort of clearance. Maybe it is that there's another tool as well. Great. Well, that's then another option. So, and especially, again, for anything where you don't want to put some crazy database up, it's more than fine, and you get an excellent free resource. In addition to HTML, so far I've been talking a lot about HTML, but there is another thing which is, it's no longer new, but it's CSS, which simply stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And it's a way of beautifully simplifying HTML. And it basically is a style sheet where you define various styles that you want to appear in your document. And when you then create your web pages, you link those web pages to the style sheet. And so what I mean is, on a normal HTML page, like the one I showed you with Hello World, imagine a website with 50 different web pages. Each one of those, I would have the formats of the text defined within the web page. And I would say the font is this, the size is this, the color is this. And that's within every single web page. That's standard HTML. Now, say tomorrow I decide, you know what, I want my text to be flashing orange to give everybody seizures, whatever. That would mean I would have to edit every single one of those web pages, which is a gigantic pain in the butt. But with something like CSS, you don't have to, because you have one document where your choices are stored, and all those web pages ask that one document what those styles are. You don't have to have just one. So I'll show you an example briefly here, which again, from my own site, the one I was showing you is my CD. Right here is an example of multiple CSS styles. So I have one style for my header here, one style for this sort of text. I have various styles that not only define the text, but also the table. So as I created this cell, I simply said cell style equals section header. And then it then looks up that CSS thing and says, okay, so I want the background to be gray, you want the text to be white, I want it to be in small caps, which is where everything looks like it's all a uppercase letter, no matter what the size. For all of these on the left here, my style sheet told it to indent left and align vertically to the top. And so you can have multiple styles all running at once. So the nice thing is that it simplifies your overall design and makes it so, again, if you want to change your templates for things, you don't have to change every single page as you go through. Okay. Moving on then, as if I haven't already thrown enough at you, it's only going to get worse. JavaScript is probably, if you've ever heard of anything beyond HTML, the most popular other piece of programming for web design. So JavaScript is embedded most often within a web page. So you have HTML, and you actually, right within the header portion of that web page, you just tell it, here's some JavaScript code that follows. You then have your functions located in there, and those functions can retrieve information from the HTML below and change it. So you can do things like, I could, for example, if this were a web page right here, let's just pretend this is on the web and it's a web page. I could have JavaScript hiding in the background, and what it does is it reads when my mouse rolls over this CSS icon right here, it now changes the style of the web page to be gray or something like that, because it can control those HTML elements below and sort of change them in that way. It can also get information from them. So JavaScript, when I told you that HTML, you can put forms up on there that ask questions of users. JavaScript can take that and do things with that. The JavaScript, as I mentioned, it sort of runs within the web page, and so it makes it much more dynamic, much more interactive, but it's not necessarily, it can't be used directly to generate HTML itself. So that at this point it exists within an HTML page and it modifies it. But what it can't do, which some other things I'll talk about in a minute can do, is essentially write web pages on the fly. So it's the sort of thing that it's not necessarily great at displaying a database. There are ways you can link it indirectly, but by itself it's not going to be able to sort of do everything you want with something like a database. Just to give you an idea of some of the few things you can do with it, even on the sort of purely aesthetic side, you can do stuff like this. This is my graphic portfolio, and this is not possible in HTML, but it's a slideshow that runs all the time. I have thumbnails below, which I can click and slide to, and I can also manually grab and flick it like this. The HTML is everything around it. The JavaScript simply has a list of all the various image files, and then does the work of making it slide in and slide out and look neat like that, without actually affecting the HTML directly. This is nifty. I didn't program it. Again, the beautiful thing about JavaScript is it's online and there's so much code freely available that this was free and open source. So I just grabbed it, embedded it within my own web page, modified it to handle my images, and up it went. And again, it makes it much more powerful. There are JavaScript applications of all kinds. There are JavaScript applications that allow you to play games within your, within your web page. So this one's just a gallery display process. So that's again how you break out of that static kind of presentation. Moving to slightly more advanced, just to make you aware of this, this is probably a language none of you should ever deal with if you're seeing people. Perl is incredibly powerful. I actually took a Perl programming class a while ago, and it is insanely powerful. It has the ability especially to deal with numerous different other kinds of databases and programs. And so Perl is the kind of thing where if you're getting a data stream from an online game that you then also want to interface with a database on your website and generate HTML content and be reading data from the National Weather Service at the same time, it's a great system for taking all of this data and parsing it all out so it can actually talk to other data. So on the back end, it's incredibly powerful. In fact, this has probably been underutilized in digital humanities. Some of the difficulty is it requires a high degree of technical competence. So it's the sort of thing that if you're doing a project where you have any collaboration going on with, say, the computer science department or other individuals who have training in Perl, you could do insane stuff with this in theory. You could pull all sorts of data from very different kinds of sources that were never meant to speak to one another and parse it all out. The problem is, it's not just technically, it's difficult. It's intimidating. I'll just say that most programming languages, they don't look lovely. If you've never done programming, they're a little scary, but you can see what looks like English within them almost. You can kind of piece some things out. Perl is just terrifying to look at. It's aspices and symbols everywhere, and the syntax is incredibly detailed and rigorous. All this gives it a great amount of power. It's sort of fitting that the guy who invented Perl was actually a trained linguist. And so use linguistic principles, which is not surprising. In fact, people have long made the connection between computer programs and linguistic principles. It is a programming language that's not just a metaphor. It has a full logical expression, simply in the same way that math is on some level a language. It's a language that pretty much exists in the conditional and imperative only, right? You know, it doesn't express something in the third person indicative and just describe, right? It commands, it reports, but because he was a trained linguist, he was then able to come up with a very complex system of control. So again, it's terrifying when you see it as somebody who had to not only learn ancient Greek, but learn to read ancient Greek off of broken stones. That stuff scares the crap out of me. So, you know, my hat's off to anybody who's mastered that. Much more likely and much more common is PHP, which is something I've mentioned before. PHP is used as a way to interface between a web browser and a database. There are other uses for PHP as well, but this is probably the most common and the most applicable to anyone in the room. That instead of creating an HTML file that exists on a web service, you can instead have PHP scripts that the user never sees, but in response to user choices, creates HTML pages on the fly. So, what I mean is you have a database of, you know, every fossil of, you know, some particular kind of creature. And on a traditional web page, a traditional HTML, if you were programming in HTML, you would have to know, you know, I've got 500 entries, and you actually create an entry within the web page for every single response. But you don't know. Maybe your user is going to say, you know what, only show me fossils from this period. Right? You can't create a web page for each possible scenario a user could ever have. Instead, this will read their request, access the database, get information back from the database, and then on the fly write HTML using that information from the database. So what we'll do is, you usually have a template designed in. It will write out the template, but in the areas for the data content, it will ask your MySQL server, you know, what are all the inscriptions from this period? And then it will display a table, and it goes and actually writes out the code. You tell it, you know, you basically have it write HTML, you code that within it. So you have HTML inside of a programming language, and it generates web pages constantly. This is used for all sorts of things. So if you want to, for example, have, again, any kind of database on the web that you want to have interactable, PHP is your #1 resource for that. For any way you're going to want to interact with data from that. So you could have, for example, a web page where you had a series of inscriptions. Again, just to sort of use my own research as an example. And it returns you a list of all the inscriptions, filtered by however you want. And now you click on one of those inscriptions, and it now writes you the web page giving you the detailed information about that inscription on the fly. And that will have all the metadata associated with that inscription. So within that template I designed, I can now see the text of an inscription, I can see multiple images of it, I can see that inscription located on a map, Google or other kind of map. I can see a 3D model I might have created. As long as I have all of those links in my database, I can simply read from that database and spit it out on the web. So it is good not just for academic databases, but content control, period, of any kind, not just the sort of your academic data. Think of the New York Times. They have a website where they constantly are making new stories and updating and changing. They could not possibly create on their own, they would not have the time to create individual web pages for all of their stories. And when they want to change one detail, they then have to go back and change them all. Instead, what they have is a template. And in their database, when they create a new story, they say, new database entry, type, headline. And they type out the caption for the headline. They enter in the links to the images on their web server. And it pops it out, next thing you know, on the front page of the New York Times. They never actually wrote HTML. It grabbed that database from there and popped it up onto the web. So if you want a website, especially, where your information is changing constantly, whether it's a database or in the traditional kind of sense or not, this is a powerful way of dealing with that. So imagine a very large database where you might have a database with all of your data. But now you wanted to have a front page where you could post articles or blog posts where you yourself, within a blog post every week or so, highlight some interesting feature from your data. And so every week you're going to want to create a new story on your front page, and it has a link to some visualizations and all that. Again, you would want to do something like that also in a PHP database. That you would have one database with all of your data, but you would also have another database with all of your stories that you put on your front page. So this might help a lot of academic sites that have these databases. They just tend to have all these databases, and they put them online and they leave them there, and they allow users to use it. But why not use your expertise to generate examples of interesting results from that data? That we as digital humanists can not only put data up on the web, but give examples about how to curate and think about that data. So that you might choose, if you were running a website of all the inscriptions from the Greco-Roman world, you might in a given week say, you know what? If you come to my website this week, there's going to be a headline story up about inscriptions from Alexandria, or an examination on another week of gender as varied by different provinces. Right? You're giving examples. Any user could do this, but they might not even realize it's possible. But since we sort of know what questions to even ask it, we could embed that all right within our own web page. Basically making a blog-like interface right on the front. Including, again, visualizations that you run on your own data that you then embed in that display. Another possibility is Java in place of PHP. So Java does many of the same things that PHP is capable of. It can interface with the server. It can spit out and write web pages on the fly. And so that's what this term means, a servlet. It basically runs as a little application that generates web pages. It can also just run as a native program on your computer. So the cool thing is, you develop a tool you might want to use with your website. You can design it in Java, and users can use it right on your website, or they can download it right onto their computer and run it without having to ever go to your website. And you can either have your tool then work with data they have locally on their computer, or you can still have it fetch data from your server, but run in an application on their computer. The advantage of Java is that when they designed it, the coders tried to make it as universally applicable as possible. So, right, a lot of programs, right, they only work in Windows or OS X. The problem is that the way that Windows and OS X and Linux and other things, the way that they do things like display graphics are often so fundamentally different that you have to design it for one system, compile it into an executable file, and that only works for that system. And then you have to design the front end again for your new system. The advantage of something like Java is you don't. You create it once and it works Linux, OS X, Windows, dozens of other systems. It has the fewest compatibility issues. That being said, unfortunately, in the last year, there's been a major security issue with Apple. And so Apple, at least as of a few months ago, was recommending disabling Java. So it's unfortunately the sort of issue that now, even if you yourself have it enabled, if you want to put up a tool in Java, you can't know that all of your users, some of them might have it disabled, and so they thus can't use it. So it is an issue to be aware of. Hopefully that will be resolved in the future. in terms of databases, which is not our focus today, but I talked about MySQL especially. That remains one of the most broadly popular database software outlets there. It's the one that I would recommend to anybody in digital humanities, just out of my own personal experience. There are other options, most popularly Microsoft Access, and the free version of that, Apache OpenOffice. Those both have database design capabilities. They both also allow you to put data on the web, kind of. But what they don't really work well with are front-end programs like PHP and Java. So if you just want to have a database that you want to access or allow others to use software to access, that's fine. But if you want to use a database to be a part of a website, that's not going to get you there. Then you want to go to MySQL. There are many other possibilities. I know you mentioned you use FileMaker, right? And what was your issue with FileMaker?
The issue with FileMaker is that there was some sort of additional license that I needed in order to. Oh, no, here's what the issue was. Anybody who wanted to access my database had to have FileMaker on their computers or they couldn't get to it. And so I had to translate it. I asked the IT person to translate it into a SQL database. But, yeah. And now the data is still located in the FileMaker program that the SQL mirrors that.
Weird. Huh. There are programs to help out with database migration. So that might, if you want to fully migrate it, there are options to get out of FileMaker if you want to. Yeah, it's a big issue that we all need to think of is that, you code it in one format, can other people get to it? And MySQL it's intimidating in some ways because MySQL on its own, you really don't have a way to access MySQL. You go ahead and you put MySQL up on your web server and it's running, and that alone is sort of invisible. And you then need, even if you just want to just upload data, you often need a PHP bridge to actually throw data up to that. So at the first step, it's a little scary. But the advantage of it is because it doesn't have a whole front end that you need to have installed, it's universal. And so the advantage of something like MySQL is you're just not going to run into that compatibility issue because you can do whatever you want with it from there on out. So to just give you even a quick example of what I'm talking about here. I was hoping to do more with this. Unfortunately, the constraints of time are what they are. I had shown you a database a couple of weeks ago of my own sort of database that I had running locally on my computer. 2 nights ago, I managed to successfully create a MySQL server up on my web space. So now, rather than being on my computer, it is online, and in theory, I could write a PHP script that runs calls and generates web pages from it. I was hoping to do that. Realistically, I should have known that I only have, so many hours in a given week, and with teaching and my dissertation writing, it was a bit much. But in theory, it's a small step to go from where I am now to having full content. All my data is there. I simply need to write a PHP script that has this address plugged into it, and then spits out data in response. And so, to actually do anything with my database, if I just want to change a field, I use this program, phpMyAdmin, which is installed on my server as well. And I use it to even interface. It's not just that I can create PHP that will generate stuff for a web page. I use this PHP program to just even change the data on my website. PHP works both ways. It acts as a translator between your database and a website, but it also acts as a way to just edit your database. And so in here, I can go to any one of my tables, and I can see all of my entries, and I can edit any one of the entries right there. And again, this all works fine for myself. I can also ask queries. So I go into MySQL, and I actually have some bookmarked queries. So I want to only get inscriptions that have text, that are geolocated, and have an image. I hit go, I already programmed this in. This is what the actual MySQL script looks like. It's all this stuff here. So that's just the language I'm querying. And here are the responses that I get. So if I was using a PHP script in a web page, what I would do is have a form on my HTML page where users enter the various things that they want to filter your data by. Then your PHP reads that form and creates a MySQL script out of it. It creates this. It then sends that MySQL script to the server and gets this data back. It doesn't get it in a web page format, it gets it in pure text. The PHP then reads that data and spits it back out to the website, and at the end, it might look something like this, or anything else. You know, I can display this data in any way I want within a web page. And so you can run queries of all sorts in that way. So you can, it's the sort of thing that you can allow your users to just choose from a couple of options, or you can give them a wide range of options to sort of get data. The nice thing is, unless you specifically want them to, you can also make it so no user can edit your database, right? All they do is get information from your database. They can query it, they can't write to it. But you could also do it so that they write to it. So this is useful for things like if you're doing a large project, and you could simply make it so that you actually have a web page front end so that anybody in your project can, sitting at their home, rather than writing XML files or whatever, you know, by hand, they can go into some web page that you've created where they simply type in, you know, title equals this, ID number equals this, and it creates new entries. It's also useful if you want to do any sort of thing with public interaction. You get public comments. You can have a database that tracks user comments, and then they can add that, but maybe you don't want them to edit the overall database. So it only allows them to edit certain aspects of the database. Let's see. I don't remember anything else with that. So again, this is the, you know, the data that you could be pulling from that database can be anything. You know, that's the sort of thing where you can have PHP pull from your database and pull an entire network node list, which you then feed in to that visualization stuff we talked about last week, especially the D3 stuff that Howard was showing us. So I could have a database that had all my data that live pulls information from the database and gives you visualizations on the fly on the basis of that data. So rather than creating one network visualization with all the characters from Les Miserables, you could have users, you know, select from any number of, you know, all, in theory, you know, if you had different data for every single piece of literature out there, they could see visualizations for all of that. Or you could say, show me Les Miserables, but only male characters, and see that instantly transformed. And so again, this is how you really you're creating layers, right? You have your data at one layer, and you have your display of said data on another layer. And that way, you're not messing with the underlying structure of things. It sort of insulates you, especially from doing a lot of uh-ohs. You know, you have those moments where you are just meaning to do something light, and you realize you've just written over everything. It is insanely easy in MySQL, if you don't have these things separated, to just, you know, you miss one line in an entry on a MySQL thing, and you just told rewrite so that every column in the title column is title X. You know, and you meant to just edit one, but because you had a typo in your where clause, instead of only doing it when it finds one example, it does it in every other case. And so it doesn't change the one you want, but has just changed the title of everything else in your entire database. This is also why you then do things like create redundancies with your database. You back it up, because that's always an issue. I also wanted to mention this as these two different frameworks for emerging frameworks for sort of more powerful sorts of development. This is the sort of thing that, again, I probably wouldn't expect most humanists to be be directly involved with this sort of design, but to make you aware of it, it might, especially in the coming years, become more popular as a way of generating these web pages. So one is called Ruby on Rails, and the other is called Django. And I was in fact first told about these by Jean Bauer, who's the digital humanist at Brown University. She's a database programmer, so she is up on this in a way I will never be. She's very smart at this. And she especially uses Django. And Django is, it does many of those, it serves many of the same purposes that stuff like PHP does. But it combines it all within one package that still keeps your data and its presentation layered separately. So all within Django, you can create your database schema, you can read and write to said database, and generate web pages on the fly from it. And Django especially was specifically designed for web programmers that need to update and change a lot. I think its tagline is, well, here it just says that Django makes it easier to build web apps more quickly with less code. It's for perfectionists with deadlines. And so this especially is if you want to have a dynamic website that's changing all the time. This allows you to have databases of all kinds that you can then not just create like a form that you simply see, but imagine again a front page like the New York Times, where you're going to constantly, every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, be putting out new stories and moving them and changing the templates. And you want to have, a headline here, but you click on it, and within that, on that story, you want to have a survey at the bottom of the story, but on another one, you don't. This allows you to work within templates. And so it makes a lot of this more simple. You still have all the power of interacting with the database, all the power of writing HTML, but you also are allowed to use their templates to sort of streamline the whole process. It also is much better at protecting you from messing everything up. Ruby on Rails is the other option I mentioned. It is just as powerful, but if you're not careful with what you're doing in Ruby on Rails, it is the sort of thing that you could accidentally, when you're trying to have it do the presentation side, if you weren't careful, you could, in theory, overwrite data. But the way things are layered at Django, you can't. And so you have one separate thing that you do, your templates for all your display, and you have a completely different side for editing and changing your data. So it's not a standard of something like PHP. I don't know whether Django has ever been used here at USF, but it's just something I bring up because it is a powerful piece of, they call it a framework, because you're it literally sort of creates a scaffolding into which you shove HTML, into which you shove CSS, into which you shove Python, is what they use instead of PHP. And so it just sort of scaffolds all of this. And the end result is a beautiful web page that looks aesthetically pleasing, but is also able to handle constantly changing content, all of which is stored inside of a database. So sites, as you can see, that use Django, Pinterest, Instagram, right? This is how they create that many web pages. It also handles URL creations. So again, when you create something like a Facebook page, everybody has their own Facebook page. This automatically handles it, so it's not like somebody has to go in and create a folder with an actual folder on the website that actually has, a whole web page in it for each user. Instead, it creates URLs on the fly. Those URLs are actually sort of stand-ins for more complex calls it's making to your database. So they're not web pages that exist in reality. It looks like a web page because it's in an address. But what it's knowing is when you go to facebook.com/your username, instead of actually going to that web server and actually finding a folder with that username, instead that username is retrieved and queried from a database and generates what looks like a web page that exists at that address, but it's not really there. And so it's much more simple. You don't have to have a billion web pages all stored on your web server. You only need a couple in that case. It's the sort of thing, though, that I imagine to get implemented in terms of a Digital Humanities project might face some of the issues of institutional support. That it's the sort of thing that if individuals in places like the IT department or computer sciences or here in the ABC or AIST, if they sort of embrace this thing, it might become a lot easier for us to access. So I mentioned this, but it's not the only choice out there. So I think the coming years will make a lot of this stuff a lot easier and more accessible. They are developing quickly. So in terms of pretty front ends that are also powerful in terms of the data, I think we're just seeing the tip of what's coming. And a lot of this stuff has been driven commercially. Again, as you see, this stuff was developed because of the growing interest of sites like Pinterest or anything else that need to act as a website, but almost as a full application in many ways. In addition, in terms of web content, I would also just stress mobile, right? We continue to think often in terms of computers, especially when we put things up on the internet, but Digital Humanities might have more outreach if we are also able to reach mobile users. Already we have things like Google Earth on the mobile phone, and as I say, if our students are going to be having their phones open in our class, why not serve them data about your class onto their phones? So at least you can pretend that they're doing something academic when they have it out in class. Increasingly, there are a large number of individuals across the world who their mobile devices are their only means of internet connection. This is not just true of other countries, but our own. And if we want to especially get across problems involved in the digital divide, right, this problem that we have as our lovely access to technology keeps growing, the difference in power imbalances involved between those who have access to it and those who don't. Going mobile greatly increases your outreach. You can connect to others who don't normally have a sort of broadband internet connection in their own home. In terms of the websites, in theory, it's not actually all that complex to do a mobile website. It's the same deal, right? People have Chrome and Firefox and whatever else right on their mobile phones. And so it's merely a matter of, on the one hand, having a bit of code in there that recognizes whether they're on a mobile device. And that's usually as simple as a bit of JavaScript that detects and asks them what sort of device they're on. And if they are on a mobile device, you can simply send them on to a version of your site that is designed for the mobile platform. If not, show them your standard site. That version that's designed for the mobile, its only limitations are the size of the screen. So it's the sort of thing that you often want a more simplified outlook. So there are also a few things that you can do in the mobile platform that you can't, or not in a standard way on a usual desktop. So my image gallery that you saw, I can click on it with a mouse and drag it across. But that also has JavaScript in there that if we were on a mobile site, I could also touch and slide. And so you can do all sorts of stuff with that. So I would encourage, if you're going to put things up on the web, to think about if it would be useful, especially, to have some sort of mobile device. It's also increasingly easy to program for mobile devices. That is to say, you can create programs which users download on their phone that then either display your content or have them interact with your content that still is pulling data from your server. So you can still have your MySQL server, the same one that your web page interacts with. But they have a program on their phone or even on their computer that interacts with the same database, but now uses the full power of a complete software package right in there. So, in theory, you could have an academic website and whatever. You could have some sort of game based on the data that you use on your phone, in theory, right? I'm not saying a game is necessarily what you're looking for, but you can do anything. Both for the iOS and for Android, the software to create this is free. So Xcode for the Mac and Eclipse for the PC, and for both of them, you just download the Apple or Android software development kit, and you can get going. Xcode especially is fairly accessible, and a lot of the design there is visual. So instead of having to do everything within code, it's sort of like Dreamweaver in that you can do parts of it in code and visually do other parts of it. When I first got into computer programming, nothing was visual. And if you want the amount of code that you need to have just to have a Windows menu pop up is an insane amount of code. I remember my dad telling me, he's like, "Oh, do you want to have a single red dot on your screen? Enjoy learning code for about 3 years before you'll ever make that happen." The amount of library function calls you need to have that happen are intense. But within visual programming, it's as simple as you say create a new window, and you just drag and drop it, and then you drag and drop buttons into it, and you're set and good to go. Visual Basic is another fantastic programming suite because you can do a lot in Basic, but you can design the template of your program, create all the windows and whatever, but then also stick C++ or any other kind of code in there. So you can have the serious code doing all the calculations, and then you just use it for designing the graphical side of your program. And then finally, if all this has been intimidating, there is also a neat little service some of you might be aware of called Omeka, which it's useful, period. It's also going to be useful for you if you don't want to go crazy into all of that as a first step, right? You have a database, but the thought of, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to try to learn PHP or get somebody who knows PHP just to get any kind of web page up. Omeka is a wonderful piece of software. So Omeka, I'll just show you, it's basically an online data curation resource. I think I might more simply define it. Imagine that you're a museum, you're the Smithsonian, and you want to create virtual exhibits online where you have all the objects that are going to be in your Wonders of the Aztec Empire exhibit at the Smithsonian. And so you create items on there for all the various pieces of pottery or other objects that are found. All of them have metadata that are searchable. And so users can then go online and view these objects. They can view them as individual objects, but they can also view them as exhibits, as groups of objects lumped together. And so you can, through this, basically create a virtual museum experience. So it's very powerful that way. And that's the sort of way it was designed. It's also useful as a simple database front end because it doesn't have to be the sort of object that you would display in a traditional museum circumstance. It can be an item of any kind. And so you can simply have this read from a MySQL server, and it's already got the whole nifty graphics side set up, and I'll show you what I mean if you're a little confused. So Omeka actually has two different ways that it works. One is a little more easy, one is a little more powerful. So the one that I'm going to show you is omeka.net, where you basically do most things manually. It exists on their web space. You upload stuff to their web space, and then you can give users that address. But Omeka is completely open source, free. So you can also download Omeka, install it on your own server, and piggyback it off of a MySQL database that powers its understanding of what items are in its collections. So if you already have a database in existence, within a matter of minutes, well, there's always issues with installation, within a matter of hours, you can have your entire database available with web pages for every item, with full descriptions and all that up online. And again, right on your existing workspace. So you basically install it, it talks to your MySQL database, and then gets that information and puts it through its sort of pre-designed templates and filters. Sorry, getting dry mouth. So I'll sort of show you what this is in sense of omeka.net. That's what the fancy thing that I was trying to do for today was to get an Omeka server running on my web space. And it would have gone wonderfully. Unfortunately, I do not have my web space through that great site that I recommended to you. I've had the same web space for like 10 years now, more than. And it's unfortunately through a terrible web hosting service. It's through Yahoo web hosting. It was something I got like a super long time ago, and my dad occasionally uses it to store his own files, so it's still on his credit card, and I'm not about to cancel that. You know, I use it far more than he does. He doesn't mind footing the bill. I think at this point I'll need to actually shell out for my own. It's fine for minor stuff. It causes a lot of errors for my SQL database alone. It's like half the time I enter, it tells me it has an error, and I have to redo it again. In the case of Omeka, Omeka needs to install a file called .htaccess, and that controls security settings. And so once again, Yahoo does not allow you to do that. So because of my choice in server, I can't install Omeka on there. So this is why, you know, making sure that you're going to have when you want to buy a server, you need to make sure that they have the capability to host everything you want to put on there. So instead I just used omeka.net. So unfortunately, this does not have the ability to tap into a live database. So it's the sort of thing that I can import information from my database, but that happens as a one-time thing. I mean, I can manually update it at any point, but it's not the sort of thing that if I edit my online database, instantly it changes what's available on Omeka. So that's, the real power is when you have that, so that all I need to do to create brand new pages in Omeka is just create new items in my database, and it's done automatically. So this is a sort of in-between. So I'll show you, if you go to the site, the public available site, looks like this. I just created one, and this, I probably spent 40 minutes on this total. And this is based on, again, my inscriptions. And so it has I chose from a prefab layout and style. And you can see here I have items, collections, and exhibits. So I go to browse items, and there's a list of all my items. I'm going to scroll down. If I go to collections, I can have different sorts of collections. So this one is just inscriptions, but you know, in theory, I can have all sorts of objects in there. I can have one for inscriptions, I can have another one for buildings, I could have another one for, you know, whatever, instrumentum domesticum, household objects, things like that. And then you create exhibits, and which exhibits can contain multiple kinds of types of items, or items from different databases. I only really have one type of item up on there, so my choice in exhibit is not particularly thrilling. But it's the sort of thing where you could create an exhibit that group together items that share some sort of, you know, relation to one another. So if I actually then go into the exhibit, here they all are. So all of these image files, those actually exist on my web server, on my own web server. The addresses to them are part of my database. So all I did was I ran a MySQL query on my database, and when I got that result as a CSV file, I simply used the CSV file to import the data right into Omeka. And so in this case, we have all the links, but if I actually click on them, you then get all the information about that particular object. So this is an altar dedicated by the Akaioi, and you sort of get the full description here, the date. Some of the, I haven't really cleaned up the metadata. You can choose what to display or what not. So I have here the identifying number, so it's inscription number 447. I have here the actual text of the inscription. It's not a large one, so it just has that. I also have other sorts of metadata. So here I have its location. I have its geographical coordinates. If I was running Omeka on my own web server, or if I paid for the omeka.net silver or gold options, the one I'm using is completely free, but if I paid for those upgrades, I could use that latitude and longitude data to display even Google Maps or any other kind of geolocated data right within the Omeka web page. So without needing to even know anything about how to code that, it's all automatic. I just tell it, hey, that field, that's where your latitude data is. That field, that's where your longitude data is, and it happens instantly. You could then not only get that information for each individual item, but you could also see a map that has all the locations of all of the items within a collection, within an exhibit, whatever, all displayed and tagged on your Google map. All of these bits of data here, from the title to the date, as I enter them, I have the option of entering them strictly as text, as they are. I also have the option of creating HTML fields, where I can basically create pop-up mini web pages for each one of those fields. And since I control the HTML, I can begin to do all sorts of crazy stuff that's not even possible within the framework of their website. So in theory, I could create a field in here that had HTML in it, and that HTML had a call to do some of that neat D3 network visualization that Howard had. So you might imagine that you could have on every entry in here a visualization of all the links going from that piece of database to all the relations it has in the rest of your database. So you could visually see where you are in your overall database at any moment, and you could even click on other entries to go to their pages. It's possible. Let's see. To actually show you what controlling this looks like, it's fairly simple. You have in your dashboard, it tells you your total number of exhibits, your theme, how many plugins you have installed, tags. Oh, I forgot to mention tags. That's another beautiful thing. You can just tag items with various labels of whatever you want. So it's often a useful way to keep track of your own inscriptions or whatever it is. So as I went through these, I simply, different themes that seem to me important, I created tags for them. So if I click on tags, I can see all of them. So I created different tags for altars, Athenians with Roman citizenship, athletic inscriptions, inscriptions of the emperor, inscriptions of divine figures, ones that have weird language. And so anybody can now go to this page and click these, and then see a list of all inscriptions with them. Also, when you go to the inscription, it will list the tags that you have. So it's a quick way that even if somebody doesn't know anything about the inscription, they can just look at the tags and start to get some idea of what's going on in an inscription. Or whatever else, whatever other kind of data it is that you want to put up on there. So in my dashboard, I simply go under items. Here's a list of all my items. And I could just manually hit add new item. I don't need any database at all. If you have no database, you can still use this and just manually, IE265 statue base for so-and-so, and you just type it all in right within their website. So if you have nothing already, it's neat, it's there. You then can go down and add all sorts of other things like locations to image files. You can also add metadata of any kind that you want. You can add actual files right into the server. So you could have files like I did, the images of those inscriptions, located on your own web space and have links. But you could also directly upload files. And again, if you are running Omeka on your own server, it's all on your server anyway. And you can control tags that way. Create collections here. You just add a new type of collection and then tell it what items belong in that collection. Same thing, exhibits. You just go down here and add an exhibit. And then the title of the exhibit, the buildings of Eleusis. And I tell it what theme and add page. And here's where you actually control how it looks, so you add different pages within any exhibit. You can have multiple pages. So I might add one that is, buildings from the Archaic period, right? And I want to have a different one for the Roman period, let's just say. And now all I do is I go down here and I can choose the layout. I can do a file with text accompanying it. That file can be a picture, it can be a movie, it can be an interactable 3D object. I can do a gallery, a thumbnail gallery. And so I just add a new content block, and it pops up here. And now I start adding which items. I start choosing which items I want to add into that exhibit. So there's that item, I can add a caption, I hit apply, and there it is. So this is an item that already exists elsewhere, but I'm just telling I want a gallery page, and that's how you get to the page you saw earlier where all my inscriptions appeared in that way. You can have multiple options. So I could have this gallery, and right below it, but on the same page, this content block underneath it. So up here you'll see the gallery, below you'll see the other kind. You can do any mix and match that you want, different kinds of items. Because of its ability to do metadata, it also means that you can start creating relationships between objects in your database. So it's the sort of thing that, say you had one object that was comprised of multiple components. You could create a page for the overall object, but also separate pages for each component object that had its own metadata. And then when you go to the overall object, it links you, if you want, to the various subcomponent pages. So it's powerful in all of those ways. And then finally, you can CSV import. So that allows you to add anything from either something like a MySQL database, but also just if you're just doing Excel, right? Create a spreadsheet in Excel, pop it into here. You're good to go. That works both for the website, omeka.net, but it also works even if you're running it locally. You don't have to piggyback everything off of the MySQL server. You can create items manually and it will do that. But it's, the true power of this, I think, is when it's installed on your own server, because then you have full control of all the content at all points, and it's the sort of thing that's a lot quicker to update, right? You don't have to go in there, create new item, whatever. If you have this all linked to your MySQL database, you're not going to be so much messing with individual items. That you do in your database. Instead, you're going to be doing things like curating through exhibits, which means it's very easy to create exhibits on the fly. So you could, every month, every week, every day, create a new exhibit of various components of your overall database. Again, it's the sort of thing that if you want to have a very interactive-like experience with your database, where you give users different themes every month. You have 20,000 things possible to look at in your database. And so today, folks, we have an exhibit from one tiny site in sub-Saharan Africa with all of its sort of associated data. And here's what I want to show you about that data today. That's just the exhibit. Again, all that data is still untouched underneath. So in some ways, this both works as an online sort of virtual museum exhibit, but it also kind of works as a limited front end for a database. You can't as easily do all the range of amazingly cool stuff that you can do if you use PHP, but it's not bad and way easier than taking that big step to something like PHP. So it's something that you can do relatively quickly. And still leaves you your MySQL server that in theory, right, you could have an Omeka server running on your web page and also create a PHP website completely separately if you had different desires for that. And you could also dynamically download information for your own use out of something like your MySQL server and use it for GIS spatial analysis. So you're not limited. The beautiful thing about something like MySQL is it works with everything. At some level, you can import to all sorts of different applications. I also included on PowerPoint a many-page long list of Omeka plugins, because there are some really powerful plugins out there. There are more than just this, but these are some of the top ones. Some of these only work if you actually run it on your server. Some are available through omeka.net, and some are only available through omeka.net if you pay. So like the geolocation one is only available that way. Coins is a really neat thing. It allows you to embed Zotero exportable citations right within your Omeka display, which means they could have a Zotero citation for your actual web page automatically, but also data associated with that. So for example, for each one of those inscriptions, there's a citation to Kevin Clinton's inscriptions, the Eleusis on Stone, an actual print volume. And I could have it so there's a simple button that they click on there, and that data will go right to their Zotero library instantly with all any associated metadata. Contributions. So if you want to make this a public history, a museum, online museum that fosters discussion and debate, you can create it so that your users can add comments, but also pictures and additional entries. You could, in theory, create an exhibit where you ask your users to create the items in the exhibit. And you can affect how much control they have, right? They can upload stuff without actually affecting the structure of anything wider. Dropbox plugin, which is really cool. If you are running an Omeka server, instead of having to log in with an FTP program and upload new data files, you can link to your Dropbox and it will automatically take certain files, all the files in certain Dropbox folders, and it will FTP them up automatically. So the same way that Dropbox syncs all your files no matter what computer you're on, it can also sync you with your own Omeka server. So you don't have to, basically, it's almost like it's right on your computer in terms of editing it. It doesn't have to feel like it's on some server that you weirdly remotely disconnect to. Timeline, which is awesome. Again, I have dates for all my stuff. You can not only display an individual item on a timeline, you can see a timeline with all the items from a collection, broken down by type or by individual entries. So you can see a timeline of all the inscriptions, right? And I could say, how many of them are statue bases in a given period. Happens automatically. And will be, again, up on the web page. Again, tags. So you saw the tags, it just makes, this plugin makes it a little bit easier to use. Definitely a useful one, social bookmarking tags. So you can, the same way you're on any site and you see the line of buttons that's Facebook and every single other, usually they have a full court press. There's a growing list of icons. You see, Pinterest and Tumblr and all that. This allows you to just embed that right in there. So in theory, if any one of your shall we say, nerdier friends or students, loves your stuff and wants to share it with their other passionate friends, you can take use of social media. Let's see what else I have on there. Especially useful, Library of Congress subject headings. So you can directly add in Library of Congress subject headings, so it will be searchable that way. And also you can have an auto-suggest. So if somebody even starts typing in a topic, it will automatically suggest Library of Congress subject headings for your objects. Image annotation, right? It's just simply add all sorts of text on top of images. This webpage has a couple of ones you saw already, or we talked about CSV import, so I already had that on my Omeka page, so that's just how you import those. Geolocation, as I mentioned, is just how you put things up on a website. There are several plugins for standards, so that they just have standard sorts of elements for your items, things like copyright information that is done in a web standard way so that then other sites can make use of that data, so that if you start entering in, that kind of information, it's not specific just to that. You can also, using the EAD importer, if you have an XML database, you can read from that and put it up on Omeka. Again, there's another comments one. The really cool one, which I couldn't get on the website, but I really wanted, was the collection tree. And that allows you to nest collections. So there you don't just have one collection and a bunch of objects. You can have an overall collection that has sub-collections that have sub-collections that have, and so you can have different layers of collections. What else? Item order. So that's just simply if you wanted a user to be able to, say, list all the results alphabetically or instead chronologically, this allows them to do that within the website. Last page of this, I'm just trying to give you the idea of, again, how expandable this program is, which is a lot. Exhibit Builder is simply the thing you just saw. That's that plugin. where you sort of actually create the exhibit. Item relations is where you actually then create something like a relational database within MySQL. So again, I could have it that these are actual physical objects, but they don't have to be. Any sort of metadata can be an object in this. So I could, in theory, create a collection that was a list of all the people that appear in my inscriptions. Even though, right, it's not as if those people are at least objects anymore, they are non-physical, but I have data about those individuals, and I can create separate entries, and now I can have a relation. So what I can see is I could go to any inscription, and right on that inscription's webpage, it gives me a list of every single person that appears on it. And I could then click that person, and up pops their page with all of their information, and on their page is a list of every inscription that they appear on. So what I can do is start at one inscription, hop over to one of those people that exists on it, and find every other inscription that they appear on. Hop to there, find all the people that are on those inscriptions. And so, you know, that's the same way that you in Wikipedia end up hours later, you know, you started off trying to look up one thing about some guy who was in a movie 10 years ago, and 3 hours later, and you're looking up like the history of the Ottoman Empire, you know, because you just sort of keep linking from one to the other. That's how you sort of achieve that in Omeka. For digital humanists, crucially, TEI display is the plugin to allow you to display XML documents encoded according to the text encoding initiative, which means marked up text. So it's not just that I can have a coin with the actual legend on there, I can have richly marked up text where textual data inside of that is actually marked up, will be displayed and linkable right through Omeka. You can also put Google Doc files viewable right within the page. So say there is an article, and pretend that you had the copyright privileges to put that on the web, right? You can, in theory, attach PDFs, Word docs, Excel files, anything else you wanted, and again, viewable entirely within the web page, whether or not the user themselves has any software installed. It works entirely as a plugin. And then some of these are just, I think these last couple are just repeated. I accidentally meant to delete those. But the terms of service is a really nice way for you to legally CYA. That way you can just ensure that you make users agree to, not take your data. And if you have images, for example, that are from your own research, and you don't care what they do with the data, but you'd rather they not take those images and put them on their own website, you can make them agree to that. It's a nice sort of easy way, instead of having to manually create that kind of data. So that's my run through of Omeka. Are there any questions? Because I feel like I've been going crazy pace here. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that the library does have the omeka.org subscription, and so there's a fair amount of exhibits that we've done, mostly through special collections.
Oh.
So if you wanted to stop by and talk to, especially Melanie Griffin of the Special Collections Department, about doing some type of collaboration, or we would enjoy that.
That's
We've done
great.
a lot of work with students and classes building exhibits, but haven't so much tapped into the faculty yet. And, so please feel free to.
Absolutely. I did not know that. That's actually really exciting.
And
So.
some of these things, I mean, there's just not enough hours in the day, so now I've got to find something.
I know, it's every single day I'm like, I don't know how I eat most days. There's too much to do.
Well, you look at the exhibitions we have online, and clearly we haven't tapped into some of the things we could, just because a lot of times we're just using students are just trying to throw something together as quickly as possible. The potential's there.
Sure.
So feel free, anybody, to stop by and talk to us and spec help.
That strikes me as especially powerful, as you say, collaboration, in that, one Omeka site on your own, you can do a lot of neat, cool stuff with that. But because of the way it handles exhibits and all these items, linking your databases with other databases that people are doing here on campus is easy, even in a tangential sort of way. Even if it's not like they're integrated fully within your database, just having your collection next to other collections. I think that's the way to.
And the way it's set up now too is the Fedora, where all the objects lie. They've got it set up. The guy from Digi, Richard Bernardi, to just put the DOI in, and And so anything that's been digitized that we have in our digital collections, anyone else could use just by putting that in. So you don't have to do the whole upload process, it's just putting that in. So it's a little,
Wow, that's
So-
beautiful.
again, collaboration with faculty and stuff we've got in the library digitized, it's really nice to utilize in the future.
I imagine too, it'd probably be easy enough where citations are concerned to create links to the library's webpage. You know, even if you can't have the text of something, you know, if you could be within Omeka and students here could click, instantly get linked to the, you know, USF library page with all the information. Potentially, some of those have links to EBSCO or online services. You're there in a matter of seconds. So you go from object that you're seeing visually, searched through a database, to the actual meat that produced that online exhibit. So that's fairly transparent and accessible. That's really exciting. I did not know. I mean, I knew the library had been involved with Omeka. It was actually their interest in it that made me first realize like, I need to kind of check this out.
Yeah. Well, we need to do better, obviously, because we don't have a lot of the expertise or the people. So this may really help kind of crowdsource and help all of us get a better presence up there. I'll email you my contact and everything if you want to put some stuff up on the campus page.
Please do. I'd absolutely love to. Yeah, I want this to be about people talking to people. So
Yeah, the same here. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Anything, you know, I'm happy to put anything you send me. If there's just anything you want to create or any message you want to send, I'm happy to, you know, facilitate you getting your message out that way. Fantastic. Great. Awesome. Slight change to talk about WordPress. Not so much in terms of WordPress as an individual software, but blogging more generally. Now, WordPress is, you know, it's actually fine as a sort of static website design, and there's a lot of plugins so you can make it not so static. But it's also one of the most popular blogging tools out there. It seems to me that it's, especially in academic blogs, far and away the most popular. In the sense that it's easy to use, but it's also fairly sort of transparent and clear. So I know you've had your Empress, is that on WordPress? So, okay, so yeah, you've worked with, how do you find it?
A little frustrating in that I can't put things where I want them to be, but I haven't spent a lot of time with WordPress. It's not as intuitive as I would like it to be.
Oh, okay. I haven't worked with it enough to have been frustrated with it. So this is something I'm, you know, aware of. I think there was some, it's sort of strange. I do a lot of online stuff, and I do like network analysis, which allows me to do social network analysis, but maybe I'm so interested in it because I'm such an antisocial person online. Other people that, you know, when I was first getting into the internet, it was because you didn't want all your friends to know everything about you. You know, the people online were the people that didn't want to have talk with all of their friends and have all that all the time. That you went online to talk to not real people at some level. So the whole rise of Facebook and everything, I still am a person that, you know, obviously there's a huge utility in that, but I still tend to not be putting my whole life online. And I'm aware of the utility academically. It's something that I have yet to, I think, fully utilize and realize myself. So blogging, I think, has become an increasingly popular but also crucially important way that we as scholars, however, deal with and interact with the public, but also each other. Blogs are increasingly a space where substantive academic discussions are going on. They are not necessarily always discussions that are easily citable. Sometimes they are, sometimes not as much. But nonetheless, they are affecting the produced results of our academic discourses. Digital humanities, especially, much of the discussion in digital humanities goes on online spaces. And not the only one. Archaeology has a heavy online blogging presence. And so real debates about applications, methodology, and theory are all going on in a way that is still largely outside of traditional academic structures, yet is positively and negatively impacting traditional academic discourses. So that individuals, you know, trying very intense kinds of stuff, are often responding to criticisms that they receive online, not necessarily in a published journal. It's also the case that academic blogs are far more likely to receive popular attention than is a scholarly monograph of nearly any variety. For reasons of cost, for reasons of time, for reasons of approachability, for reasons of multimedia. My own field, right? It's difficult to get somebody to print a book sometimes that has actual Greek font in it because it costs so much more for a printer to actually print Greek characters. Doesn't matter on a web space. So there are lots of advantages. Unfortunately, the connection between this sort of publication and tenure and promotion is tenuous at best. It is the sort of thing that I think, as its current state, it's an extra line on a CV, but from the standpoint of many colleges facing a serious tenure decision, it matters not at all. But that's about as much as I can say, not at all. So in some cases, it might matter a bit, right? There are certainly incredibly popular blogs that have received the support of their institutions, but it's very much on a university-by-university basis. Some universities have been very excited about particular initiatives and blogs run by their academics. Others, it doesn't matter at all. And so that's something that I suspect we're going to see some evolution in that. The wonderful thing about WordPress is its accessibility. Perhaps some of the danger, maybe it's a danger, is the lack of peer review. In that, what's to stop some of my friends from the state that I grew up in also putting up an ancient history blog where they claim everything is aliens? Authorship, it's a new kind of issue. It's not to say it's not one that's insurmountable. It's not to say that it's necessarily any better or worse than our current state. Peer-reviewed scholarship sounds great, but there's plenty of terrible scholarship that gets through peer review. And peer review creates a process where some of the most distinguished individuals in the field increasingly have a hard time getting anything published, who are waiting 6 months to a year to hear back on their manuscripts. So already, most of the sort of lively debate in any field doesn't go on in books. At best, it's going on in journals. Something like blogging, we can have a debate that is much more real time, where you can find out what's happened in Athenian epigraphy in the last 6 months. Blogging is a place where I'm going to find it much more quickly. And in particular, again, for my own field, Athenian epigraphy is a field where sometimes, whatever you want to look into, the book might be 70 years old. And there's not going to be another corpora published for maybe another 70 years. On the other hand, there's an online database of every single person known from an Athenian inscription. It's updated every week and contains a list of every single update. So if I'm writing, and I start writing about an individual, and 6 months later I'm finishing my dissertation, and I want to know, has the research on that updated? All I have to do is go to the website, type in the inscription, and it tells me every change that's been made to that inscription or that person in the last 6 months. So not just on broad matters of the field, but on small technical details, we can stay much more up to date, much more current. Like I said, it's also a useful way to engage the broader public, not just to speak to each other, but to speak on larger issues, especially when the discourses from our various fields intersect with broader public debates. I think this is a way for public advocacy and outreach. It also is a way for us to, as humanists, respond in what our questions are, respond to what public interest is, rather than writing in a vacuum in which we then put it online for the public to digest or not. To interact, to get feedback, to find out what questions other segments of the population might like to know. And we can serve as facilitators for either giving them the answers to those kinds of questions, or maybe helping them rethink those kinds of questions. Either way, these debates will go on with or without us. Whether we're a part of it or not People are going to blog online. They're going to blog about ancient Greek history, or they're going to blog about French poetry. It's going to happen whether or not the Academy is involved. The question is, do we want to be a part of that debate? And I think that we should. We should want to. That is a part of the humanities side of digital humanities. That we should not be seeking to just speak to one another, but have a meaningful stake in public debate. Lastly, I'd also like to think and question whether we can think of digital humanities not only as the creation of 3D models and visualizations and the creation of sort of data and websites, but even acts like forum moderation, where you create a forum for the discussion of various topics. And rather than directly write ourselves, we act as moderators to allow for the discussion. Now, one only has to take a short jaunt down the comments section of any internet website to make you realize how horrible that can all go, right? Unmoderated opinion from the internet is horrifying and at times even physically dangerous. Careful moderation, however, can keep a lot of that under control. It can keep a debate intellectual, it can keep it respectful. I was a member of a website, a forum one time, that they would ban you for a week if you used the wrong "your" on an internet post. Let me tell you, that increases the level of discourse instantly. And so, again, by just controlling what kind of attentions various things get, we can facilitate discussion, an entirely different kind of digital humanity. One where we're not throwing everything out there, but we're using digital tools to effect a traditional humanistic kind of debate. And we might also think again as digital humanities as public history, as public outreach. That it's not merely research for our own end, but one that's designed to have the same sort of relationship with the public that museums or other public history institutions do as well. And I think we'll probably face many of the same issues that other forms of public history deal with. In terms of funding, there are challenges are legion. I know on the first day people were sort of interested in various aspects of funding. Would that I were some 30-year veteran who knew every source of funding in digital humanities. The amount of people, though, that have that kind of knowledge are very few, and usually they don't know comprehensively, because as it currently is, there's no central kind of place for digital humanities funding. And in fact, you can get it all over the place, including many, from many sources that are not traditionally designed for digital humanities. So, the big pie in the sky is still NEH and NSF grants. That's the big money. That's the, golden star on your CV, if you get to pull that in. I think last year, the NEH awarded something like 30 startup grants for digital humanities centers across the country. So it's significant, but it's also highly sought after, highly competitive, and so it's a little more difficult. That, however, is not the only way you might start a digital humanities initiative. And in fact, what it seems to me, and this is based entirely on my sort of anecdotal experience, is that many universities end up creating digital humanities centers or digital humanities initiatives, not by looking for funding to create a digital humanities center, but rather by piecing together the resources that they acquire through individually funded projects. So that you don't set out and ask for money to create a digital humanities center, you look to get the funding to acquire the resources for one or two key projects. That then forms a core pool of resources. And as you bring in other projects, you then take the resources gained from those projects and continue to add it to a growing pool. And so over time, you create this sort of center that not only works for creating the technological material resources, the computers, the laptops, the video recording systems, or whatever it is that you want to use, it also works in terms of creating the individuals who are trained to use that technology. Because each project of digital humanities creates a momentum, which you bring in money, but you also create trained faculty and trained students, who all are then able to go on and create digital humanities projects of their own choosing. So at a certain level, we can create a momentum that becomes self-sustaining. in which what begins as one project spawns 3 or 4 projects. Those spawn a handful of others. And soon you've got a large portion of the academic community involved from any number of departments. I would also point out that you can fund many of these projects through entirely traditional sorts of things. So yes, I could potentially fund my online visualization of the inscriptions of Eleusis by applying for some sort of technologically based grant. I might also fund it by applying to the American School at Athens for an entirely traditional kind of funding for epigraphical or archaeological or historical research. If your research connects to, say, an interest of a particular community or group, very often there are associations that have funding opportunities in that. If you want to put up documents from medieval Czechoslovakia, you might find that, medieval Slovakia, we'll have it there, you might find that the local Slovak Cultural Council might have money. That could be used for anything relating to that, including the technology you need to acquire to do your research. And finally, recent developments have also seen the creation of crowdfunding in academia. So many of you might be aware of Kickstarter, which is you can sort of fund any sort of project. It's very popular for, say, software developers. I know games. It's been huge for people to do games because you can put online what you're proposing for a game and get people to donate, and then on the basis of how early and how much they donate, you can give them promo gifts and extra stuff. It has now moved in the world of academia. There are both projects that have been funded through Kickstarter, but there are also now Kickstarter-like clones that are designed for academic projects. So you can get funding that way. You can also then, again, give them neat gifts, right? If you donate early, we'll 3D print the object of your choice and mail it to you from our collection. Once the whole thing is done. It's also a way that, again, in terms of thinking of us as a publicly based discourse, what is more I guess it's sort of partially democratic, partially capitalist, but what is a more responsive kind of interaction with the public than directly funding through them? It also, of course, raises some issues, ethical issues and other. So I attached 2 websites. One, you can just find a sort of discussion of some of the issues, difficulties one finds in digital humanities on this PDF file. And then University of Florida actually has an excellent website talking about the most common sorts of digital humanities specific funding out there, like the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, NEH, and a number of others. So I included that link. Theory remains a major challenge. We are wrapping up here, so I guess I didn't end as early as I'm hoping, but we'll end on time. Theory remains an open question for digital humanities and the relation between theory and practice of digital humanities. Digital humanities, at times, has been characterized as neo-empiricism. It's easy to see how that might happen, right? If, again, I'm just thinking of historians in the 1970s and 80s when they were obsessed with social history, became obsessed with quantitative kinds of data. Over time, that fell away as historians sort of poked holes in what we can really get out of that data. To what extent is that data actually reliable? To what extent is that data, in fact, distorting our picture? We need not fall in, just because we have more data, doesn't mean we're any more empiricists. In fact, having more data can in some ways undermine empirical assurances. That the data itself can make us aware of its own distortions. I would argue that the rise in large data sets only make it that much more crucial that we as scholars are aware of our interpretation of that data. We are aware that we contextualize that data, we read meaning into it. And so far from being a system where we simply let the data speak for itself, we are active agents in the curation, reformulation, and recontextualization of data. For my mind, I can't think of anything more postmodern than digital humanities. When you can take text, delocate and deconstruct individual elements of the text, lay them along other texts that they would not have been laid on in a traditional page format, and allow a reader to come up with a new meaning from that text on the basis of this reformulation of data, Jacques Derrida would be dancing in the streets if he had this capability. It allows us to think of our data and be aware of the very active way that we deal with it. My own example here, just from my own research, using it to deconstruct assumptions about monolithic sort of constructions of identity, such as political identity, familial identity. Using network theory, what was once a thing that could only be described in neat terms, we can now see as a much more complex interplay. We can deconstruct the nation state through something like network analysis, as we see individuals not as belonging to individual categories, but as consisting of networks and connections flowing across and through different kinds of boundaries. Here alone, just to make some sense of what you're seeing here, all the individuals here in blue belong to one family famous at my sanctuary. This family had been understood to be a family in all other scholarship. It has been treated as such. They dominated the sacred offices at the sanctuary for almost 2 centuries. Yet viewing them in a network analysis, we actually are aware there are different branches of the family. And in fact, the only thing that has ever caused us to view them all as one family are the actions of this one branch, because they put forward inscriptions that link them to all other branches. And that branch is not the branch that had been dominating priestly offices for 2 centuries. They're a branch that came in exactly at the moment when the old branch lost control. They married in, regained control, and put up a whole bunch of inscriptions saying, you know, those guys, that's my great-great-granddaddy. And creates the illusion of a unitary family, but one that was much more fluid in reality. So it allows us to deconstruct sort of unitary concepts. I find it's useful for things like gender theory, post-nationalist theory. To take a historical sort of approach to it, it is useful for both macroscopic and microscopic approaches. If you want to follow in the footsteps of Ferdinand Braudel and use these massive kind of approaches that, I want to tell the history of the Mediterranean as it existed in monastical records stretching down the centuries. Right? A database put online is a wonderful way to tell that story. And if I want to take the anthropological approach of a Clifford Geertzian thick description, and I want to analyze just one example of Balinese cockfighting and find all of the various cultural aspects coming into play in one instance, where even betting on ringets for animal fights is a way in which you explore all other facets of social interaction. This is another fantastic way to do it. It works on all levels. Finally, digital humanities faces that problem of definition. I think it's still, you'll get any sort of answer. If you ask somebody who says, I'm a digital humanist, and you say, what is digital humanities? You can get definitions that involve pretty much anybody that uses Zotero, right? Anybody that uses a even slightly technologically based approach to very narrow kinds of definitions that only include people that not only do something online, but that ultimately build and create interfaces for people to use data online. There's a variety of definitions, and I don't think we need to see that variety as a negative. It's such a variety because the field itself has evolved over the years. And in that, it's like any other academic discourse. In the same way that archaeology has continuously self-examined and put forward new goals, new assumptions, so too does digital humanities. Partly as a result of internal discussion, and partly as a result of broader social developments. as we, as a culture, are more interested in online access. It's not surprising that digital humanities has gone that way as well, not entirely a result of internal discussion. Digital humanities, then, in many ways, serves as a discourse through which other academic fields find expression. This is because you have a hodgepodge of so many individuals through others. Digital humanities can be a lens through which historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, linguists, literary theorists, and others can express. But the question is also, in its future, will digital humanities evolve to the point when it becomes a field with its own questions? Questions and goals and assumptions that, yes, are in dialogue with other fields, but also are of interest to digital humanists in and of itself. Again, in the same way that archaeology used to, in many ways, be defined as a handmaiden to history. Now, however, archaeologists have their own research agendas, which, yes, still speak to historians, but also pursue questions and assumptions entirely outside of the field of history. And so I wonder to what extent do we see that future for digital humanities. Lastly, here at USF, I see a particularly bright future should we choose to embrace it. The growth of online open source has offered so many tools, so many avenues for projects of all scales, from simple research assistance to advanced spatial data analysis and visualization. These open sources have made it easier to augment our own projects, and as scholars of the digital humanities, it should be our mission to contribute to the public knowledge. We live in a world where the majority of our students check Wikipedia before they check the library website, and don't even ask how far down something like JSTOR, an academic journal, is on that list. I did recently with my students. It was depressing. And I don't fault them as individuals, it's just the broader sort of cultural trend. Digital humanities, on the other hand, allows us to enter into that debate much more actively. If our students are going online to check answers first, why aren't we there? If the public is discussing these issues in forums, we must enter the discussion. The public will ask questions whether or not we're there. The question is, do we want to be a part of any answers that they ultimately arrive at? USF in particular has a curious but thrilling potential. There is, as of yet, no digital humanities center here, unlike many other universities. However, although this has meant that there's been no single united effort, the result has in fact spawned a variety of approaches. And in that, we have a more diverse and broad group of scholars interested in digital humanities already on site than are in a number of universities with digital humanities centers. Because of a digital humanities center, especially one that was created as a sort of byproduct of one particular project, they tend to have one approach that they rinse and repeat for everybody. And so, although you create a lot of training on the campus, you don't have a lot of diversity in approach. Here I see, forgetting places like the building we're in, there's already a wonderful diversity here, far more rich than I found in other universities. Many other digital humanities centers, as I said, focus only on one or two aspects. Here at USF, though, we already have resources in play that frankly are the envy of any university I've personally been to. AIST, Visualization Center, Digital Media Commons. Brown would love to have that sort of stuff on their campus. When I tell my friends what is here, they go beside themselves at all of the possibilities. Yet, again, we have all of these resources, but they're disparate, located throughout the university. And often, individuals don't know how to make use of all these resources at once. So linking them together needs to be something that we think about going into the future. Yet, at least for the humanities, digital markup, digital text markup, has lagged here at USF. And that is one area where we can perhaps bring ourselves up to speed and learn a lot from other digital humanities centers. Most digital humanities centers emphasize text. And as of yet, we don't have a powerful sort of center for that. You can still do a lot with text with what's already here. The Advanced Visualization Center alone can do a lot of neat stuff with text. but in terms of creating a system where we can help digital humanists encode text, analyze text, put text out that you can recontextualize on the web. We have so much more that we can do. And I would argue that adding the text element is exactly what links our resources that are already out there on campus. Because the textual approach might automatically have spatial elements to it. It might automatically have big data that you can analyze and visualize. You can see your text in 3D environments in the case of inscriptions. You can see text on these social networks in which they exist in terms of network analysis. Text serves as a bridge to what we have going on here. It not only links the resources we have, but it increases their power manyfold. DH projects, digital humanities projects in particular, foster cooperation between a wider degree of individuals than is normally the case in a university. In any one digital humanities project, you might have professors and faculty, graduates and undergraduates, from history, anthropology, English, computer science, engineering, anything you can think of, mathematics, all come into play. You want to talk about game theory, you want to talk about the sustainability of a bridge that served an ancient community. You can bring in anything. And I don't think I need to emphasize the importance of interdisciplinary studies in the current academic environment. So if we as a university are talking about interdisciplinary studies, digital humanities is the way to go. It is a way, it's not the only way to go, but it is madness to ignore it as a way to unite and create discussions across departments and across academic divides. It is the height of interdisciplinarity, and it fulfills our goal not only to talk about advanced theoretical concepts, but to create undergraduates and graduate students with trainable, usable job skills. Ones that they can apply directly. We should and must use every tool at our disposal to get at our sources, to shape our problems, and to ask full questions, to give full voice to our argument, and to join the debate that we already have underway. That's all I have. Thank you very much. With that, are there any questions or anything anybody's interested in from stuff we've talked about in the past, or we're sort of at an end point? Nope. All right. I just wanted to, didn't know if there were anything people had pressing from previous weeks or whatever. All right. Thank you all very much. It was a fun experience. So stay tuned again.